All right, well, welcome to the first of three events of our Discover Multi-Faith series. Those of you who've been connected to the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center for many years probably remember our fairs. We're in the EV building where there was always food. And we're hoping to bring that back in some form or shape eventually. But this year, we decided to have a series of three events to really explore multi-faith and maybe some heavier topics. And this panel is about pathways to peace. And I think most of you know me, but I am the Reverend Ellie Hummel, and I'm the chaplain and coordinator at the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center here in Montreal. And I'm really pleased to be here with you today and see you all. And as we begin, I'd like us to just take a moment to ground ourselves in our places, whether you are at home or in an office or on campus where I am. And with that, I'd like to invite my colleague, Sonia Massant, who is the interfaith facilitator at our office, to acknowledge the land we're on.
Thank you, Ellie. Good afternoon, everyone. So we will begin with a territorial land acknowledgement, as Ellie mentioned. If you could all listen in silence. Concordia University is based on the island of Jujage in the Ganyangahaga language, Munyang in Anishinaabe, and more recently, Montreal or Montréal in English and French. The Ganyangahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gathered today. These are unceded Indigenous lands that have historically been known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationship with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And some of you may be in other lands or have connections to other lands, and it's also lovely to think about that. And so with that acknowledgement, and maybe we can all take a deep breath and let go of what we did before and know what's coming up after and enter into this panel discussion. So this afternoon, we will explore some difficult questions, and I'm really glad you've come. You've chosen to spend this time with us, some of you as panelists, some of you to be part of the conversation. And I also want to say welcome. We might be joined by some others later, and also welcome to those of you who may listen to this later when we put it on our social media and our webpage. So we will explore some difficult questions today. And we live in a time when violence against religious peoples are on the rise. It's really a sad state of affairs, if you ask me. We just celebrated the 5th anniversary of the Quebec City mosque shooting, and we have witnessed other attacks against Muslims in recent months. Anti-Semitism too is on the rise, and it really disturbed me to see the swastika among the many flags that the truckers' protest used in Ottawa, and in that context it was clearly a symbol of hate and anti-Semitism. There are also other instances of hatred, and often they are connected to racism and also to white supremacy. And I think on a maybe less sort of physically violent level, the passing of Bill 21 has really brought out some of those realities as well in Quebec. And so today we're here to hear about some of those situations, but most importantly, we will also hear stories of hope and courage and resilience. And while we cannot solve all those problems before us in an hour that we've set aside for this discussion, it is my hope and really my prayer that the reflections will be meaningful and in a small step hopeful, as together we find pathways to peace here at Concordia and beyond here. And I want to just say a few words about the process. So we have 5 panelists, and I will introduce them shortly. And each panelist will first address the question, what has it been like for your community to live in this climate in Canada? And then if you have questions, particularly for clarification after the first questions, I invite you to put them in the chat. And then we'll have a very short discussion, and then we'll move to the second questions, which is, what are some pathways to peace that your community is involved in and that we can be involved in together, modeling interfaith collaborations? In short, what gives you hope? And if you have questions, please again write them into the chat. And after the second round, we will also have a time for discussion. And as we begin, I ask you to enter into this discussion in the spirit of collaboration. I'd like to invite us all and ask you to speak from your own experience and to listen with care and respect to each other, and to start from a place of curiosity. I'm sure there are things which we will disagree with or just see differently, and it is through these different perspectives that we grow and learn. Ultimately, that's what we're here to do, really, is to grow and learn and gain wisdom and insight. And so with that, I'd like to invite the panelists. And I have actually selected, it's a bit of a random order. So I'll ask Ellen, then Jas, Salam, Adriana, and Diane. And I will, before you speak, I will introduce you. So Rabbi Ellen Greenspan, I'm really glad you're here. And Rabbi Greenspan is currently the rabbi educator at Temple Emmanuel Beth Shalom. She moved to Montreal 8 years ago from New Jersey and has thoroughly enjoyed becoming a part of the interfaith community here in Montreal. In her free time, Rabbi Greenspan loves to explore Montreal and especially the outdoors. She also enjoys knitting and baking, and I'm a witness to both of her skills in that. And during the pandemic, she has baked her own challah almost every Friday. So way to go, and the microphone is all yours.
Thank you. I never know how close to my computer I have to be. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the thing about baking challah is I have to admit that even though I'm a rabbi, I work, on Shabbat, and until I started working at home, I was never able to bake challah. Like I had baked challah maybe 5 times in my whole life, and now I've baked challah almost every week for 2 years. So it's kind of cool. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm happy to try to answer the first question about what it's been like to live in this climate that we're in the middle of. And I have to say that, without a doubt, we're facing unusual challenges at this moment in history, not only in Canada, but all over North America. I obviously can't speak for everyone, but by and large, I have to say that the Jewish community feels pretty safe in Canada, and definitely in Montreal, we're very fortunate to live in a community that doesn't experience a lot of overt anti-Semitism. I'll say a few words about that more when I answer the second question. But I think all of us were horrified by the hostage crisis that took place in Colleyville, Texas, just a few weeks ago. I think it was at the beginning of January. I don't know the rabbi in Colleyville, Rabbi Citron Walker, but I have a lot of friends and colleagues who actually know him personally. So it wasn't just this thing that happened to some rabbi somewhere. Like, many people I know him. And I can only speak for, like, I want to say that the situation was frightening for all of us, probably for any congregational clergy, rabbi, minister, priest. Like, the idea, I can only speak for rabbis, but I know that the situation that Rabbi Citron Walker faced is every rabbi's nightmare. And I have to say that just in the last week, like in the last few days, I've been in meetings with a few colleagues in the States who said, I just attended or I'm about to attend an active shooter training. Wow. In fact, just this morning, a friend of mine said, here are 3 things I learned if there's an active shooter in your sanctuary. 1, run and tell other people to run. 2, if you can't run, hide something and don't play dead. And 3, if you can't run and you can't hide in the immediate area, find a room in which you can barricade yourself. Like, what a horrible situation for rabbis to have to worry about potential threats to their lives and the lives of their congregants, rather than doing the day-to-day work we all signed up for. Like I said, fortunately, the Jewish community in Montreal has not faced a lot of anti-Semitism, but we don't want to be complacent either. About a year ago, it was January of 2021, there was an anti-Semitic incident at Shara Shamayim, the Orthodox synagogue in Westmount. And a man was arrested for vandalizing the synagogue, and he had a gas can with him as well. But thanks to the synagogue security and the local police who acted quickly, little damage was done and he was arrested. But it was a wake-up call that such events can happen anywhere. And I have no idea how much time that was. I was talking kind of fast, but that's pretty much what I have to say about that. I think we're living in very scary times and we can't be complacent.
Thank you, Alan. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Jas Kaur. And Jas is, wait, let me organize this. Let me first take you off the spotlight and highlight Jas. Just a second. Here we go. There we go. Welcome, Jas. And Dr. Jas Kaur is a Sikh faith liaison volunteer for the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Centers, both at Concordia and at McGill. She's a former adjunct professor in the McGill Department of Education, also a renowned visual artist and author of a beautiful book, Mantra Art, The Journey Within. And if you haven't had a chance to see her artwork, Google it. It's just stunning and amazing and very, very soothing and thought-provoking at the same time. Jas is someone who finds the experience of meeting people from diverse backgrounds a joy and enjoys the personal connection to the divine. So all yours, Jas.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you everyone for being here, inviting me to be on the panel. So for the first question, what has it been like for our community to live in this climate in Canada? Racism, particularly against the Sikh community, remains a reality. As a consequence of Bill 21, Amrit Kaur, a Sikh woman teacher who wears a turban, had to leave Quebec because of her religious symbols. And I find her words quite poignant in describing the climate, not only in Quebec, but in the rest of Canada for our community. She says, to some people, no matter how much you integrate, no matter how hard you try, you will never be Canadian. You'll never be a Quebecer. You'll never shed that immigrant label. Mm-hmm. And she continues to say that I get hate mail on the regular. People who don't even know me send me these awful messages on social media. I look at these profiles and I see that the same people telling me to go away are themselves parents. They seem to forget that I am someone's child. They forget that there's a person under my turban. Bullying is a significant issue for Sikh students. Many students have reported being teased and bullied for looking or speaking differently, for keeping visible articles of faith, or even just for their names. Prejudice of any kind comes from a place of scarcity, insecurity, and a lack of understanding and knowing and knowledge. So ignorance being a main source of prejudice and hatred. So Sikhs have been in Canada since the 1800s and are hardly newcomers. Despite the long journey of Sikh engagement in Canada, negative attitude towards them are not uncommon. There is no doubt that the Sikh community must continue to reach out and educate about Sikh beliefs. Teaching basic beliefs of others should be a fundamental building block of education. Creating pathways to peace, I believe, begin with education at school and most importantly at home. Parents who themselves are in closed boxes cannot but help transmit to their children the same values. Parents are the first educators of children. They come to school with already set ideas about others who don't fit into their own boxes. How do we educate the parents about abundance and oneness? 25 years ago, I was a secondary school teacher then. I taught a course that was called Moral and Religious Education. I personally thought it was brilliant. In a school which was extremely diverse, it was helpful in bringing about a form of understanding and, in fact, pride. To be different, to be different looking, became the norm as we celebrated both the similarities and the difference in an annually held fair in which parents got involved. No one got converted to another religion. What happened was that it opened pathways of understanding and acceptance and celebration and collaboration. Most education programs now want to avoid teaching anything that has to do with opening these doors of understanding for the other. So as a Sikh woman with 3 sons and many friends who wear turbans, I'm acutely aware of the prejudices people carry within themselves, the barriers appearances bring about. However, I'm very passionate to not let them affect me or any of us in any way. I earnestly believe that it is our responsibility to learn to counter hate with as much love and compassion, to learn to react with understanding and forgiveness, and recognize the oneness that connects us all. And I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joss. You already gave us some hope and looked ahead to the second question. So lovely. Thank you particularly for your stories as well. And the next person I'd like to invite to speak is Imam Salam Al-Wanyawi. And he already unmute himself. I'll spotlight you. There we go. And Imam Salam Al-Wanyawi is the president of the Muslim Council of Montreal and the Asuna Mosque. He's one of the Muslim members of the Multi-Faith Network at Concordia and also the Muslim chaplain at McGill. Al-Wanyawi, or Salam, was born in Egypt and has been in Canada for the last 50 years. Wow. Over the last 30 years, he's been working actively to bring together people of different faiths, to advance harmony, to defend rights, and to fight hatred. All yours, Salam.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It is great to connect together on special issues such as this one. Of course, we are all aware of some of the cycles that has been taking hold of creating hate against the Muslim community in particular. But of course, we always have felt as well the Jewish communities confronting similar issues. Almost about the last 30 years, we have been receiving almost every few years some event or some issues that have devastated the community, have been of a very serious concern to us, to our children, and especially to the image and the way they are growing up in Canada. It was quite serious, because here we see Muslims have been attacked, not because of anything they do or did, but just because of news coming from Far East, Middle East, or because of individuals having wrong actions who have been also clearly proved to have mental issues or have the different venue to go through. We have seen 5 years ago, the attack on Quebec City Mosque, killing 6 people. I have seen the 2 of the wounded people who until today are suffering from their wounds. One of them will live all his life in a wheelchair. He doesn't know the person who attacked him, and the person who attacked him did not know him. Just at random, just walked in a mosque, killing anyone in front of him for any chances that he got to do that. We have seen also the negative and false stereotypes that were directed at Muslims, and even sometimes, unfortunately, from journalists, which we believe they are educated people to research and look closely to some of these issues, but also from ordinary people. Some of the complaints I received, for example, at the time of the Prophet's cartoon that came about and was an issue threatening the peace within our society. We have seen, I have met Muslim women who complained to me of the fact that they were spit at when they walk in the street with their hijab. We have seen also the government trying to institute laws or rules or regulations to prevent or limit the freedom of religion and their attire, whether it is in Islam, Judaism, or Christianity. It did touch Muslim women in a very hard way as to the Islamic attire or required the religious attire in these cases. This all, of course, have left us with quite pain. But the positive part of all of this is the unity that I've also have seen within Montreal among Muslims, Jews, Christians, and non-religious people who came across, who walked with us in the streets against many of these laws and rules, and who supported the ways of Muslims. It has soothed many of the people in our community, and it has opened the way, of course, for exchanges and of understanding and of trying to, of showing that we are all indeed in it together. And when we have to walk, we have to walk together, confronting these issues, and we have to support one another in making sure that we'll all be able to live in peace, free from such an attacks, and having to have equality within our society, you know, first, second, or third class citizens, and that we would have to defend all our rights all the way, regardless of sometimes that some politicians may succeed in passing laws that are discriminatory. It is very important for all of us also to realize that in spite of some of these discriminations, the strength that we extend from one another has made it very clear and made it very difficult for a politician to move forward with much harsher rules or laws. And also it made it very clear that this connection that we are having today, and this kind of meeting that when we meet and talk about it and reflect about some of these issues, that we will not stop working hard against any kind of discrimination, any kind of hate, regardless who is the community that is targeted, and regardless what kind of discrimination that is. All of it would be refused, and we'll all stand together in unity against any such a thing.
Thank you so much, Salam. I think we're all people of hope and faith, because many of us already moved to the hope. So that is wonderful to hear, but it's also really important to hear the hardship and the reality of what it is like to be a person of faith in this environment. Next, I'd like to invite Adriana Cabrera Cleves, who represents the Baha'i community at the Multi-Faith Network. She's a native of Colombia, has served on various committees of the Baha'i community in Montreal, and is also the president of the Atatikan Foundation, which is founded to support the Indigenous resurgence and reconciliation process in Canada. She's a museologist, researcher, consultant on human rights. She's somebody who does Tai Chi and Qigong in her private life and enjoys nature, literature, and the art. And she's also somebody who always seeks to support others to live in dignity. So all yours, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for the invitation to participate in this panel and to have this meaningful conversation together. I will use my 5 minutes. I won't use more, but I did prepare something because I think it's a very important question. So I would say that we are indeed living in times where we see violence around the world, not only against people who are religious, but also we see violence against members of certain religions. As you said, we just commemorated the 5th anniversary of the Quebec City Mosque shooting. We see that anti-Semitism is increasing. We have the Bill 21 in Quebec that violates the rights of freedom of expression and freedom of religions, which is what the Canadian Human Rights exactly said, the Human Rights Commission. With respect to the Baha'i community, living in this climate of intolerance and rising violence in the context of religion, I would like to share our experience, not in Canada, that is actually a country that has received many religious refugees and Baha'is fleeing here for refuge, but in Iran, where there is a widespread persecution of Baha'is. So first, I would like to say that Baha'is everywhere work for the betterment of society and strive to contribute where possible to the peaceful development of their countries. And this is also the case in Iran. Unfortunately, the Iranian government has blocked them in every way just because of the religious beliefs. Baha'is are Iran's largest non-Muslim religious minority, and they are routinely arrested, detained, and imprisoned. They are barred from holding government jobs, and their shops and other businesses are closed or discriminated against by officials at all levels. Young Baha'is are prevented from attending university, and those volunteer Baha'i educators who have sought to fill that gap have been arrested and imprisoned. I particularly have two Baha'i friends here in Montreal who were imprisoned in Iran for teaching other students. Their fields are psychology and science. The strategies of the Iranian government that has used can be compared to the Nazi regime approach of disinformation and hate propaganda, which led to the Holocaust. If the Baha'i community has escaped a genocide of great magnitude, is because they have fled the country since the Iranian Revolution started in 1979, and because of their constructive resilience response, which is non-confrontational and non-adversarial by nature. So this is one of those examples of hope that I will present in the second question, answer to the second question that we will explore. So this systematic persecution that has been going on for the last 43 years has been inflamed particularly by a campaign to incite hatred against Baha'is in the official news media. Although most Iranians are not deceived by this campaign, it has been associated with a series of violent attacks on Baha'is and their properties, including an extensive campaign to vandalize or destroy Baha'i cemeteries. Iranian Baha'is are unable to speak internationally. This is why this is a great opportunity to talk about what is happening there. The Baha'i International Community Office, which is based in New York, acts as the official outlet for information on the situation of Iranian Baha'is. And they also use many international mechanisms to call attention to the situation of Baha'is in Iran. So examples of these efforts are advocacy and support resolutions, the UN Human Rights Council and in the General Council Assembly, cooperation with other human rights NGOs, and outreach to the international news media, along with the coordination of various campaigns to raise awareness about the ongoing human rights violations against Iran's Baha'i community, which is peaceful and nonviolent. It's a community that's really what we are about to try to create peace in the world, work together with others to do this. And if anybody is interested in learning more about the situation, you can visit the Baha'i International Community website, which is the BIC.org. And I would like to end with a thought that I will develop a little further in the answer for the second question, which is that there is a growing global trend of hostility towards those who appear different. And there are associated political efforts to divide society into us and them. And this is something I think worth looking into. So with that, I end my thoughts on this question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adriana. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Reverend Diane Vollard to speak. Diane is in her 16th year, wow, as the senior minister of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. She is the 11th settled minister since the founding of the congregation. Oopsie, I have to flip my page correct. The church, since the founding of the church in 1842, and the first woman to serve in this role. She's also the president of Coalition Inclusion Québec, which is a group currently fighting Bill 21 in the courts. And I know, Diane, I've seen you often in the news for that, and I'm always grateful to hear your voice of wisdom and reason speak up on that. So all over to you.
Thank you, Ali. And I'm so honored to be here and so moved by what everyone else has said. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister, and our community is made up of people who are atheists, agnostics, believers, and spiritual seekers. And we see each other as being on individual spiritual paths, but we come together to share certain values. And I'm not going to name them all, but I want to just say that above all, we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And as we live through these times, it is so heartbreaking to witness so much hatred and division here in Quebec and Canada and around the world. And it can be so challenging to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of people we don't agree with. How do you love or forgive someone who hates you or who acts violently against you or against others? And in this time of pandemic, this division that we feel can also include this great anxiety that we have that the actions of others may threaten our very lives. So for us as a religious institution, we're called to help people navigate these differences, often within our own families, with friends, fellow students, or colleagues. And we need to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of others, but that doesn't mean sacrificing our own inherent worth and dignity. So we need to find places where we can have meaningful dialogue, where we can seek points of understanding in a time when even finding mutual agreement about what is truth is being threatened. People we love are being targeted, whether they are our Muslim, Sikh, Jewish, or Baha'i, or other religious siblings, or people within my own community who are LGBTQIA+, or who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And we mourn, we shed tears, we worry together, and we strive to do better, to go where love calls us to justice. And this is truly holy work, trying to figure out how to navigate in these difficult times and how to stay true to our faith and our values. I think it guides us, but it also challenges us. And I'm not going to say I have all the answers or even that my faith has all the answers. I just know that we have a lot of work to do together to foster peace in these challenging times, and that my faith calls me to do that work with all of you.
Thank you so much, Diane, for those words of passion and of wisdom. So now I don't see any comments in the chat, but I do want to just open the floor for 2 minutes to everyone to just ask if there are any questions, particularly for clarification. We'll have a time for discussion after, but is there anything that you just like to have some clarification on? And I'm also aware that we have, 5 faiths represented, and there's many of us are there from other faiths as well. So, or faith spiritual paths, maybe if you're from a tradition that's sort of not more non-traditional or consider yourself atheist. So are there any comments? Maybe sometimes it's also good to just take a break because there was lots of words shared. So
I think comment. Ellen has something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, Ellen has her hand up. Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, I have my hand up. I have a I don't know, comment. It's not a question. It's really a comment. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and a few of you kind of alluded to this. So I come at this, and I know Diane is originally American as well. I come at this as American. I moved here from the States 8 years ago. And I think that part of what all of us are up against is the climate around religion in Quebec. I can't speak about the rest of Canada because I know nothing about the rest of Canada. But I, as an American who comes very much from a culture of where there's very strict, if you will, I don't know if that's the right word, but very strict separation of church and state, and very there's a very high value of freedom of religion. And I think here we have separation of church and state, but rather than freedom of religion, freedom to follow the religion of your choice, we here it's more like freedom from religion. Like there's a negative value to religion here. And that if you are a religious person, a person of faith, I don't actually really like the word religious personally, but the idea that if you're a person of faith, you have to like fight to observe your faith. And I know people who've gotten, ridiculed for professing, saying that, oh, they belong to a synagogue or they're involved in, the Jewish community. People can be somewhat scornful about that. And I think that's something we have to be aware of. I'm trying to not be political about it, but I think that it's definitely something that's very different in the culture. Like here we have this, here in Quebec, we have this culture of secularism, but it's secularism that borders on like anti-religion.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ellen, for pointing that out. I think, you're right. It was mentioned many times, but not really spelled out. And so thanks for spelling it out. There's also another question in the chat about the point of not the point of education, but what the starting point is when many people have different understandings on surface levels. I'd actually like to keep that question for the discussion after. And so I'll move on. I think, if you're okay, we'll do it in the same order, and I'll ask the 5 panelists to speak about what are some pathways to peace that your community is involved in and that we can be involved in together, modeling interfaith collaboration. What gives you hope? I know some of you have already spoken to that, and for this one, you have 3 minutes. So Ellen, I'll let you start again, please.
Sure. So as you mentioned in your introduction, like I've really enjoyed my involvement at the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center. And I think that interfaith dialogue or multi-faith dialogue of this nature is so important. And the synagogue that I am associated with Temple Emmanuel Beth Shalom has a long history of being involved in interfaith dialogue. And when I say we, I mean the synagogue, because obviously I've only been here for 8 years, but the synagogue's been around since we're 140 years old. So we've been around for a long time. And we've been actively involved in Montreal's Christian Jewish dialogue group. I know Diane's also been involved in that. I think she was the chair for a while, if I'm not mistaken. We actively seek to build relationships with other faith communities. We've hosted many non-Jewish clergy, including Ellie and Diane have both spoken at Temple, and not only clergy, but faith leaders to speak at Temple. More recently, we've been building bridges to the Muslim community as well, which has been a real challenge. Like I think prior to the mosque shooting in Quebec City, it was hard to find partners, people who wanted to enter into dialogue or enter into community with us. And I think we've had more success with that, unfortunately, because of a horrific event. A few weeks ago, we hosted 2 guest speakers for Muslim Awareness Week. On the Friday after the Quebec City shooting, we participated in the interfaith group that joined hands around the mosque in Saint Laurent to ensure that they could worship in peace. And we sponsored Syrian refugee families and really supported them through their integration into the Montreal community. And we really feel that this is just such an important part of being part of the religious community in Montreal and in Quebec. So these are all examples of things that give me hope. This event today gives me hope. Having civil conversations, listening to each other, learning about one another's beliefs and practices and traditions. I think all of these things are things that give me hope. And I'm a clergy person and I love poetry and prayer. It's one of the things that I have kind of taken to bringing to our services is not necessarily liturgy, but poems and whatnot. So I want to share just a few lines of a poem that I found that I think expresses this hope. It says, let the time not be distant, O God, when all shall turn to you, all shall turn to you in love, when corruption and evil shall give way to integrity and goodness, when superstition shall no longer enslave the mind, nor idolatry blind the eye. May all created in your image become one in spirit and one in friendship, forever united in your service. And I'm happy to share that. If anyone wants me, I can scan it. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ellen. Oops. Yeah, thank you. It would be lovely if you maybe if you send it to me, I can send it out to participants. Our next speaker again is Just, and Just, it's over to you. There you are. We can't hear you, Just.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Especially if you speak up.
All right. Okay, so in the second question, I'd like to start off by sharing a story about a group, a Sikh-oriented group called Khalsa Aid, which is based upon the Sikh principles of recognize the whole human race as one. And it's run mainly by youth, and that's what gives me hope also. They have been instrumental in providing Canadians with much needed help at various points in this past pandemic stage that we've been in. Particularly one that I'd like to share with you is about in 2019, when the flood waters began to rise in Quebec. The province had just passed Bill 21. So regardless of what the attitudes might be, they went to serve. The volunteers recall arriving at one house where the rising water was already waist high in the basement. Although they were there to save the property, the homeowner's greeting was far from friendly. Before they could get to work, he pointed at one person's turban and questioned their ability to help him. His tone was rude and remained that way even when the volunteers jumped into the water that got deeper and deeper as they went into the basement. When they were done bailing out the basement and they had begun stacking sandbags around the house, they noticed that the homeowner was recording their efforts on his phone. As he did so, they can remember him saying, "By the grace of God, angels were sent to protect my home." So the work was grueling. By mid-afternoon, the water was going inside the lining of the volunteers' jackets, but they didn't stop. Shifts were 16 to 17 hours long with only small food breaks. At the end of that first shift, the mayor's office called the team leader, Mandeep Singh, who was the main leader, to recognize the humanitarian service they had provided to the city. After that, they joined forces with other communities and the volunteers to continue with that. So the Khalsa Aid community volunteers have turned their attention to helping people who are homeless, and they struggle with addictions. These efforts include distributing groceries, warm meals, hygiene products, and back to school supplies, and many other such efforts. So hope is one word that defies a singular definition. It can mean anything one wants. For me, hope is found through meditation and contemplation on the universal truths. And hope is not wishful or magical thinking. It is a source of strength and renewal, an invincible summer within. So instead of being tormented by worries about the future, why not focus on what we can do today to make tomorrow a better reality? I look forward to working with every one of you to try to make this a better reality. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Just, for that moving story. That was really poignant. Adriana, your stories of hope.
Yes. Is it Salam first or do I go first?
Oh, you're right. It's Salam first. My apologies. I skipped ahead. Salam, your stories of hope.
I don't mind the order. Don't worry about it. Well, actually, sometimes when you are challenged, that brings the best of you and brings the best of people around you. The issue that I have noticed personally, and many in our communities as well, is the fact that words matter, and whatever is said does affect the people. And of course, we have to hold politicians, and especially what has happened south of the border, the leader that continued to attack Muslims, the Sikh, people coming from the east, and that of course automatically followed up with some attacks on mosques and synagogues in the United States, for example, and as well as here, when leaders always speak about trying to fix the religious people and to fix their rules or their ways, and they try to correct them. So it means they are dysfunctional and that they need to be fixed. So all these words, of course, were in front of us as an climbing a high hill to try to overcome the effect of people who are supposedly trusted from the population, and they have been guided in the wrong direction. So the first thing was to confront those negative and false stereotypes, to deconstruct them, and to try to make sure to give the people the reality about some of these issues that were completely misleading at times from our politicians. And that, of course, was quite disturbing. And as well as with the media, that they did not really know the Muslim community. They did not have any experience with them. And sometimes they just, all they have is something they read on the internet. So having to have mosque open doors was a great event that Mosque Open Doors have invited Canadians at large, or Quebecers here in Montreal, and we made sure that they can come and share a bite with us, and we'll talk and do exchange, and they can ask questions, and we can relate to some of these issues. As well as, of course, continuing to visit churches and synagogues, getting together, talking with one another, sharing a meal together. We have done this repeatedly in synagogues and on the churches. And I remember the late Father John, how much we have done. In fact, I used to visit probably his mosque more than sometimes his own congregations, his church, more than his congregation. So I've done quite a bit. And slowly, I've seen the light. May not be at the end of the tunnel, maybe even much closer than that, that people have a better understanding today about Islam. And they also, with these attacks, they have more, there is more sympathy toward the Islam, Muslims and Sikh and Jews and others, as we all try to fight this kind of unprovoked attacks on peaceful religious communities, just trying to work together with the rest of society to show that we can all do it, even with our differences. That these differences does not block the fact that we care about our neighbors and we care about our friends, and we can move forward to improve our way of living in Quebec and, of course, around the world, if we all export those ideas and those practices. So it did work good. I am very happy with the result, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Salam. We all have such great stories to give hope. And now on to Adriana. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. So I'd like to start by talking about the very last part of your question, what gives you hope? Well, I like to mention that we know of prophecies in many cultures and religions about a golden age, we can call, for humanity, that the world is going to, that we are going to have. And particularly the Baha'i teachings tell us that we are going right now, that this period of so much chaos and conflict is just a period of transition. It's a phase where we're going towards something called the most great peace. So we're moving from, we can call it as an adolescence of humanity to a stage of maturity. And when we have that perspective, I think we can keep hope. We don't think that this has no solution or we're just getting worse and worse. And it helps us think on how to act, how to not let those disintegrating and destructive forces affect us, and how to align ourselves towards building a new world with like-minded people. So I've also shared how we understand this period of transition, where we have two major social forces at work, which are integrating and disintegrating. So we see that the system which we function today is pretty much an unjust system, and most likely based on false assumptions about the human nature, that we are per se selfish, which is not necessarily so, or how progress can be made, which is only through competition, and that's not necessarily perhaps true. It's just assumptions upon which we're based the system we have. So this system is not sustainable, and that's why we see so much chaos, and this is what is falling down. So the process of disintegration is a system that's not sustainable and that is not serving us anymore. So we all need to be engaged in that other integrating activity with all those other integrating forces of creating a new mindset, a new system of justice, of unity, of peace. And we believe that this is not only possible, but it is inevitable. So it will happen. And that thought, that understanding gives us hope. We need to keep the hope, otherwise we will be paralyzed to act. And we need the hope to build that new reality, or as we call it, and this continue contributing to this ever advancing civilization. Even if we don't think it's advancing, it is. we believe in that. And then I'd like to go back to that last part of my answer to the first question, which is that there is this growing global trend of hostility towards those who appear to be different, and that there are many efforts to divide society into us and them. And this is where we need to join efforts with different religious communities to promote greater degrees of unity and solidarity at all levels of society. And in other words, we need to realize the oneness of humanity and the oneness of religion. We might have different colors, but religion is one, and the source of religion is one as well. And so this is actually the fundamental principle of the Baha'i faith, the oneness of humanity. And this is why in this sense, I'm so interested, as Ellie said at the beginning, I founded the Atatekin Foundation, which supports the indigenous resurgence and also reconciliation efforts. Particularly interested because the revitalization of resurgence of indigenous cultures will, we believe, also bring a lot of light in the world, because they've understood so well from the beginning the interdependency, the interconnectedness of all people, the sacredness of people, animals, and nature. And also they have not disconnected from the spiritual dimension of reality, which is something that we see happening since Enlightenment, where we focus only on the reason.
Adriana, I'm going to ask you to wind down and to finish that thought, please. Yeah.
Okay. So then I'm going to finish with the example of the Baha'i approach to oppression that we call constructive resilience. It's a great example
you
of—
have 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will recommend that you watch a documentary that's called To Light a Candle. And it's a documentary that looks at the treatment of Baha'is in Iran, that, as I said, are peaceful religious minority who are oppressed. But it looks at the creation of the Baha'i Institute of Higher Education, which is an underground university established by the Baha'is to allow them to pursue their education in the face of oppression. So instead of being adversarial or confronting, they've created ways in which they are building from inside.
Okay, so we'll watch. That's 20 seconds, so thank you so much. I know it's really hard to say what we want to say in 3 minutes, but I do want to leave room for the conversation after. So thank you for that really great big picture thinking that you've given us, Adriana.
Thank you, Ellie.
And last but not least, I'll invite Diane to give us her perspective on hope.
Thank you, Ellie. So I think many have already said this, and that that we need to keep the door open for dialogue, and I think we need to develop skills for dialogue. And the Christian Jewish Dialogue, which I've been involved with for a long, long time, is right now working on a project to do exactly that, to start to help people to learn these skills, because I think we've lost a lot of skills in terms of dialogue. And the other thing is advocating for justice. So in my community, we've gotten very involved in fighting against Bill 21. And we started out by bringing a lot of faiths together to say, when the bill was on the horizon, what can we do? And we ultimately ended up forming this Coalition Inclusion Québec. So I thought it was really amazing the way people came together. And also amazing, in my own community, we don't tend to wear religious symbols, but we really believe that we have to rise up for other people's human rights and for the freedom of conscience and religious expression, as well as particularly the economic rights of Muslim women, who are being especially targeted by Law 21, Bill 21, and are being barred from work or professional advancement because of their faith, and then being treated as if they are very other in this society. And something that gives me hope in this is, when this teacher was forced to leave her job in Chelsea because she wore the hijab, how public opinion started to shift, and people started to say, this is wrong. And so that gives me a lot of hope that with time, as this law becomes real to individuals, real to people, and it's not just theoretical, that Quebec opinion, public opinion, will start to change. And I would just want to, I think that we have to build relationships, and there are a lot of big ways that people have named already, and we do a lot of the same things in our community. It's very important to us, but I think it's also important to think about showing up to do the small things. Mm-hmm. And so a while ago, the members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal supported communities in Ganawage, and I see everybody leaving, I'm sorry, when they were keeping a people's fire in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en Nation out in the west, who've been trying to stop a pipeline from going through their ancestral territory. And people in our community provided firewood and soup to the fire keepers in Ganawage. And later, after the fires had been out for a while, there was a tragic death in the community, and the fire was restarted. And people in Ganawage contacted the community and said, would you please provide firewood and soup once again, so that people could gather around the fire and heal together. So we can build these relationships not by showing up to tell others what to do, but just offering something as simple as firewood and a pot of soup. And that I think is a place to start. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know about you, but there were was really touched by many of your reflections and the stories. As somebody who loves stories and who can really get my teeth into them, that's sort of what really paints a picture of where the hope lies. We've heard so many different things, from very small things, bringing firewood, keeping basement dries, to the very big picture that we're in a time of transformation and anything in between. And also just the showing up. So thanks to each and everyone for coming. We're not done yet, but I do know some people have to step out. So if you do, just thank you for coming, and you can watch the rest of it later if you want. But I now want to open it we'll take about another 10 minutes or so for questions. I know that's where the good stuff starts, and there's so much richness in that. And we will continue the conversation, but I want to open the floor to questions. And actually, Ben, who already left, Ben is one of those staff leaders from Power to Change, one of the Christian groups on campus. And he asked a really great question in the chat. Said, it was mentioned that education is needed. What do you think a starting point would be when many people have a surface level understanding of our various beliefs? Would you say that education should be focused around accepting differences or something else? Just wondering if you want to speak or respond to that, of your own thoughts. So just raise your hand, either virtual or the real one. Salam first, and then Ellen. And in the interest of time, I just ask you to keep your responses to one thought.
Very good question, which actually would remind us the emphasis in all our work is respecting each other's differences and being able to build on it. And as much as when we connect with each other, those differences probably will come much closer, but we still have to cherish those differences and the freedom of everyone to do what he believes to be right.
Thanks, Salam. Ellen,
what I'm going to say isn't that different. I mean, I think that it's about accepting each other, that diversity is a good thing, and we want, like, society would be very boring if we were all the same, but it's about learning to accept each other's differences, even before we start learning about each other's traditions, because that's a long process. We have to, the value of tolerance and acceptance, I think, has to just be a given.
Thank you. And I see Shaheen's hand and also Diane's. And Shaheen, welcome. And we can't hear you, Shaheen.
It's always the unmuting that gets left over. So I'm listening to everyone, and thank you so much for your thoughts. What comes to mind is, very humbly, I say that I'm only a self-taught person. I didn't go to university. I don't have any degrees. I'm not an imam. Thank you, Salam al-Minyawi, for being here with us. And he can corroborate by the Quranic verses that I would refer to. God Almighty says in the Quran, I created you one single community, and it is you who made the differences. So my thoughts are that if we are the ones who made the differences, we should be responsible for accepting each other as with our differences. So that's one thought, and I will not take up more time. I'll let the floor to Reverend Diane, and then if I have time, I'll come back to the other points. Thank you.
Thanks, Shaheen.
Thanks. So, now that a lot of education about religion has been taken out of the schools in Quebec and this move to be a very secular state, we have to find new ways to get out there. And I have this dream, and I've had it for a while, and I swear I'm going to make it happen one of these days, is to bring young people of different faiths together, to travel together around Quebec and to meet young people who are not particularly from religious traditions or come out of an anti-Catholic experience, which is true for a lot of people in Quebec, to actually exchange with each other. And then perhaps to have a filmmaker who comes along and we make a film out of it. But I think we have to get creative in ways we're going to do this, because it's not going to happen in the education system as it's controlled by the current government. So.
And I want to add a word too. In Ben's question, he asks about the surface level of understanding. And I think sometimes we're hung up about understanding. I don't need to understand everything about someone else's faith. And I also don't need to know everything, but someone else mentioned it's about the relationship building. I can certainly get together with someone who says, so you are whatever, Muslim, tell me about that. What's it like? Or say, I don't actually know anything about Baha'i. Where should I, tell me what it is? And that's the beginning. And if we worry, not worry, but think more about the relationship, the understanding will come. But so often the fears, I don't know enough, so I shouldn't do it. But it's that quality of curiosity that for me is such a wonderful starting point for interfaith. We'll take one other question or comment. If any others have one. I know it's a little bit like preaching to the choir, but the choir has to get louder and sing more loudly. So Susan, please.
I am wondering, as I listen to all these great religious leaders, what's the possibility of creating a service to invite strangers in? So you have, once a month, each religious institution hosts all the other religious leaders so that we can learn, so we can sit in your synagogues, in your mosque, and experience what worship is like, and have that experience so that we as religious leaders have greater understanding.
Salam, go ahead.
Start taking my name. You can take my name down. We can start right from tomorrow.
There you go. Yeah, so this sounds like a project people are passionate about, are interested in, and that sounds great. And I do want to introduce Susan, who is a new minister at the St. Andrew and Paul Presbyterian Church up the street, and a new member of our network. And she'll introduce herself in a minute when we finish this. But, you know, I think it's those kind of ideas, like what would it be like if some of the greatest things we've done have started with, like, it's kind of sounds crazy, but what if we did this? The conversation couch, which many of you know, started just like that. And I think that's where the creativity that Diane talked about comes in. And that's, I actually believe that's for me where the hope is. A bunch of us sitting together, drinking a cup of coffee. And I had sort of I had this crazy idea. That's often how the best things start. Any other final words, final thoughts before we wrap up this part? I'll say a few closing words, and then we'll move into the next part of our meeting for our network. Yes, Salam.
Maybe just for me to add, really, sometimes we don't know how similar we are, regardless of the differences that are there, that we don't focus on our similarity. I was invited at one time to Rabbi Whiteman's synagogue, and we had a nice kosher dinner with a group of Muslims from my mosque and a group Jews from his, and he let us attend the prayer at sunset. I could not believe it, that was the first time for me to listen to a Jewish prayer. How similar the words and how similar the prayer was different. It's different than Muslim prayer, but it's so similar that I just was completely gladly surprised to see the connection with Almighty God. So these are, in general, just feelings that we should all get together, as Susan have just said, and we try to interact with people in general and get people to come in and put their ideas. That's, I think, is a good point for us to go forward with. Thanks.
Thanks, Salam. And Adriana, you get the very last short comment.
Thank you. I was just, after I heard the last two of you speak, it made me think that there is one house with many rooms. You know, as like the religion is one. We have many rooms, but it's one. I grew up as a Catholic, and I joined the Baha'i community when I was researching for my master's thesis on missiology for peace and reconciliation through indigenous heritage. I came across the Baha'i writings. And I remember I used to read prayers or writings to this friend of mine who was a staunch Catholic. And he would say, oh, that's a copy of the Bible. And I would say to him, well, it's the same author. We have the same author, right? So it's just many rooms in the same house. And as we found all those things we have in common, because the spiritual reality is one, then we start maybe seeing reality as it really is, not so divided and separate, but as unified.
All right, got some claps there, and those are some wonderful words to end with, and also beautiful image. There's many different images for the work we do. There's the image of a house with many rooms. There's we all climb a mountain but find different ways to go up, and flower with different garden with different flowers. There's many images, and I think that also speaks to the creativity of our movement. And so in closing, I just want to say, I know this is a huge topic and we just sort of get some ideas going, and we could probably, my ideas are just sort of percolating, and I probably could ask another 10 questions, but we are going to end this in a minute, but I hope you have taken with you some food for thought, maybe even just one idea, something you want to learn about more, one idea you want to act on as part of this network or as part of your own networks, whatever they may be. And I also want to just tell you that this was the first in our multi-faith series. We have 2 more events this year and lots more activities coming up in the MFSC in months and years to come, I'm sure. So this one was the first one. The next the next event is a panel discussion with students. Sonia is working with our student clubs and some students on what's it like to be religious on campus. So real down-to-earth experiences and more discussion. And then our spring celebration. Spring is such a wonderful time where so many of our holy days overlap, and speaking of similarities and learning how differently we express those same concepts. So that'll happen sometime in, I think, March or April, and COVID willing, it'll be in person. So I know, Sonia, you're working hard at doing something in person on campus. So, but ultimately, those 3 events are just part of the work of the Multi-Faith Network and the Multi-Faith and Spirituality Center here, and all of us who are involved in multi-faith work. And so I hope, and I really believe that the work we all do together does lead to peace building. And I hope we all may find ways to live with peace and to build peace and understanding in this beautifully complex world. So thanks for coming, and we'll say goodbye with that.